Welcome. I'm Frank Conkling, and this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. For this workshop, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some issues associated with parcels inside the parcel fabric. And while these solutions, as far as how we correct them, they're specific to this problem. Overall, what we want to do is try to give you a sense of how do you approach fixing these. And there's a couple of different issues on here. Anyway, before we start, again, I want to go and point down to the QR code in the lower right corner that will take you to our website. You'll find out who we are, what we do, why we do it, that sort of thing. You also can see that we have the ESRI Partner Network badges, including the Parcel Management Specialty Badge. We are the first business partner in the country to go and get that, and we're very proud of it. We also have the Release Ready specialty and the state and local government specialty on here. If you are here live, and if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and put them up in the chat window. Chris is there, and he will go and moderate it and let me know if, in fact, there's any comments or any things I have to pay attention to. So let's get started. All right. So today we're really going to look at that really sort of generalized discussion. How do you fix certain things? And we're going to go into detail as far as what issues you might have associated with it. For example, one of them is going to be densified curves. Then we're going to start looking at some situations and looking at the different approaches to fixing those things. All right. So this is one we often get, is that we get our clients and who've gone and maybe they've taken a CAD file or they took a shape file from somebody and they brought it into the parcel fabric, just copying and pasting it in. And the result is a densified curve on here. And if I go and shut off the other layers here, you can see here are the densified curves. Now, interestingly, with this, it looks like they have actual different subdivisions or different phases inside the subdivisions, and they go and they're misaligned. That's a different problem. But if there's not a major misalignment, you can actually take care of both of them at the same time. Now, often ESRI and people that are working with the parcel fabric will tell you to use the straight lines and curves tool, the geoprocessing tool. I'm going to recommend against that only because often it will result in taking straight lines and making them curves, and it won't be a really conscientious or an accurate representation of where the curves are going to be. It serves it on a, unless you have certain specific ones selected, serves you on a bulk. So I am now on here and I'm editing. And if I go over to my modify, this is actually the align features tool is what we're going to go and use to fix this. Before we get started, we have to go and think about a couple things in here. The align features tool is used in conjunction with topology inside of here. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go and take this align features tool and use it to recreate new geometry for these layers that have a densified curve on it. Then we're going to go and take the old geometry and delete it. So often taking and redefining the geometry and then taking and deleting it will run into problems with topology. So I recommend that if you're going to use align features, just be aware of what topology, if any topology, is being used. And then secondly, I'm going to set it, and in this case, I'm going to set it to about 5 foot. That's way too big on here, but I want to go and just sort of make sure that we understand. So the curve by definition and the densified curve specifically, we're looking at curves. And when we're inputting these curves, the odds are we're not going to use the traditional arc segment, but rather what we're going to do is we're going to use the endpoint arc segment in here. All right, so we've set everything up. We've taken care of and turned off our topology. We've got our tolerance set for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and put my curves in now, making sure that I create true curves on here. And I'm going to go and tell it to take every feature that's inside of this tolerance and move it or change it to what my new geometry is. Another important thing on here is when I do this, make sure that I tell it to allow features to be modified without actually having to select them. So I'm going to start, and in here, I'm going to zoom in, and this one here is the one that's correct. I'm going to go and click on the endpoint here, and I'm going to click there. Now, an interesting thing about this is that if I wanted to, and I knew what the actual radius is on here, I could right click and actually have it set the actual radius for here. So now I'm going to go here, and I'm going to click it here, and I'm going to go here, and note that it's just inside here. I might go and make this 8 foot instead of that. All right, and now I'm going to go to my next curve and replace that. Then I'm going to go over here to my next curve. Again, this is my good curve on here. And then finally, I'm going to go here to here. So again, I want to recognize that what it's going to do is going to take those existing densified curves, and it's going to take the polygons, it's going to take the lines, it's going to take the points for those, and anything that's inside of this tolerance is going to move so that it is moved over to the path that I just drew. Turn off my topology when I go and do this and see. So when I go ahead and tell it to go ahead and realign this now, it will go ahead and realign things over there. Now, note on here, some of this, it's not going to necessarily realign everything. I've got points in here and lines in here that didn't quite make it. Because of the overlaying element in here, I also am going to wind up recreating lines from other records in here, but that's okay. We're fine with this. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to select this area here. And what that's going to do, if I look at my attribution, is it's going to select every point in there. It's going to select all of the lines and all the polygons in here. Now here, I'm going to be careful, and I'm going to deselect those things, those elements that I don't want to impact at all. So in this case, I'm going to deselect this, and I'm going to deselect this on here. And you'll see that I have my lines on here, and I have my points. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and delete those. I'm going to tell it to delete all of those out of there, and it will go and remove any vestiges of those lines or those points on there for me. So it's going to take it out. If I actually had these polygons symbolized, you could see that the polygons are still there. So I've corrected the geometry of the polygons. I've deleted all the lines that had bad geometry, selected them and deleted them. So I'm left now with my polygons, my records, and all the points are gone also. So what I'm going to have to do now is rebuild those records. So I'm going to my parcel record workflow, and I'm going to tell it to rebuild not my active record, because by the way, I don't even have one here. I'm going to rebuild my extent. I'm going to tell it to rebuild the records of every single extent that shows up in my current display, this area that I'm working in right now. Now, when I do this, it's going to go out to every single record and run through an analysis. It's going to look at the record polygon, look at all the lines and polygons that are associated with those records. So for the polygon, it's going to look and say, do I have lines that are associated with the records? If I don't have lines, or if I've deleted those lines, it's going to go and rebuild them, but it's going to rebuild them with the good geometry on them. Then it's going to go and look and say, what about the points on the ends of those lines? Do you have points on the ends of the lines? And if there is no points on the end of the line, it's going to rebuild those points. So now let me go and tell it to build all the records inside my current extent and check and make sure that they have everything they're supposed to have on here. So we'll go and rebuild it. Now, if you look, the densified curves are gone in here. And what I have now is I have the lines and the points on here. If I wish to, I can now go in here and select these lines that I just impacted here, and I can go and tell it to go and update the geometry on here, or excuse me, update the COGO for those lines, and tell it to go ahead and update. And it will update the geometry on here. And if I actually turn on my labeling, I will see that here is my geometry for this. And that geometry, by the way, has marked as being from geometry. It's not marked as being entered because I did not enter these values in here. I actually had them calculated from the geometry on here. All right. Let's go in here and let this continue so we can see. Now, again, if I wanted to, when I was going and creating that initial curve, I could have gone and just right-clicked, or I could have hit R while I was going and creating that initial curve and told it that this was supposed to be 25 feet, or that this was supposed to be 90 feet, 90 feet, 25 feet. If I know what those values are, I can go and input those as I'm rebuilding this. Much better way. It makes sure that all of these are accurate as far as what it's representing and what it's rebuilding on here. If, however, you're not quite sure, you don't want to spend that time, you can just tell it to go ahead and use the inversed values in there, and that should be fine. Now, an interesting thing on here is that you note when I went and built this, I made sure that I didn't do it one complete circle from here all the way around to here. Rather, I went and I clicked at those points where it intersected. But if I look, there's also other intersection points here, and it went and built those also. So again, I wanted to make sure that it would snap to those points where I put that intersection on here. And that's why I clicked at this point. I said, here, rebuild this circle, here, rebuild this one here. It automatically went and created a point for the record because that was missing, because I had scooped that up when I went and deleted those points. All right, that is densified curves. Now, if I were to look on here, I've got a whole bunch of them in here. All right, and again, if I want, I can do this same exact thing all the way through here. And let's go ahead and just do it. And let's see, this is right now, this radius is 333.23, just so we can see it. So let's go back here and do a densified curve on here again. And let's rebuild this one here. And I'm going to start here. And I'm going to go all the way down to this. And I'm going to do an R. And this is 333.07, let's use. All right. And there it is there. It will go and input it there. And I put it in there. All right. One thing you want to watch out for is you want to make sure that the adjacent points, because if you've got points close to it, it's going to snap those points over. Matter of fact, if you watch, you'll see that this point comes over to here without me necessarily telling it. But at the same time, if I look here, that means that that point, which is an end point, is going to be snapped over here. I want to be careful with that, just make sure that I'm doing what I intend to do. So in this case, because this is not as far off, I might go and make this 5 foot instead of the 8 feet. I then don't change this straight line, but I will capture that one still there. Again, real quickly, I'll go ahead and tell it to realign itself. I'll then go in here and I will select these. Let's make sure I select these also. I'll then hold down my control key and unselect those things that I don't want to be part of this. I'll unselect those. Now, if I go and zoom out to here, I can then delete that, and it will delete the curves. It will delete those lines. Let's go and take that one out too here. And I can see I've got a line there. Let's go ahead and delete that anyway. Now what I'll do is I'll go in here, I'll zoom out and make sure that both of those are there, and I'll tell it to rebuild my extent. It will rebuild them. I can then go in here and select those lines, that, by the way, is just my shortcut to update Kogo. Do that at 333.07 is the one I did. So once you get used to doing this, it's actually fairly fast to go around and clean these things up as you're moving around. Again, as a surveyor, I'm kind of a data snob. I want my data to be correct. I know that I can go and kind of try to do this with a Slacker tool, but it just it doesn't sit right with me in that there's too many opportunities for it to go and further degrade the quality of my data instead of being the same. So getting ready to leave densified curves. Does anybody have any questions on this or any comments on this? It is intense. You have to take every curve that's got densified components on there, but it's worth it in the long run because you're building data that you can continue to rely upon year after year after year. All right. The next thing we're going to do then, if I go back here, is that was densified curves. Densified curves, once you learn this, it becomes fairly easy to do. You just want to pay attention as you're doing it. Also, the other issue is you might have some issues with a cusp of a curve. What is a cusp of a curve? Is when I have a curve that comes this way, and that wasn't very well drawn, the curve that comes this way. And then I've got something that goes back that way. And when I do this with a densified curve or the align features tool, I want to make sure that I tell it where that point is. Otherwise, what will happen is that the curve will come in correctly, but what will happen is it will take this line and bend it because depending upon what my overall tolerance is on there. You want to make sure that you pay attention to what you're doing and recognize there's a certain number of techniques you want to use on this. Let's go back to the next one, which is merge points. Merge points is actually a really nice tool, and it's one of my favorite ones. And it's perfect for things like this right here, in which you've got 2 points and they're supposed to be coincident, supposed to be exactly the same. However, because of either misalignments or failure to join on previous parcel fabrics, they are not the same. So the merge points tool is actually over on the quality control or the quality workflows tool, and it's here. It's called merge points. Merge points tool is very simple. Really, all it does is it asks, just select a box with multiple points in it. All right, so I can go and draw a box with multiple points in it. All right, it then will tell me where do I want the points to go. So whichever point that I have, and it will mark here, this is the one that's going to be preserved. Now watch what happens when I tell it, no, I want to preserve it to this one. It will go and move this line over to here. So it's going to show you, if I keep and just preserve this point, this is where your lines are going to go. This is where your polygons are going to be adjusted to. And again, this is the one I want. So I want it to go and move this line, this polygon. If there's another polygon on that side too, anything that's connected to that point, I want it to be moved over and merged into this other one. Note here, there's also an issue and it says you can allow removal of lines and polygons between. So if I had a sliver there, it would also go and remove that sliver. Let's go ahead and tell it to go and merge these two together. Let's clear this up. If I go in here and select this now, I will find I only have 1 point. It does not move it over, which is what the move tool would do. It merges them and you're left with 1 point in there. So yeah, one of my favorite tools. It's a great tool. I can go in here, for example, and fix things like this and this. I can even use this as sort of a way to start making changes to curves and such, and tell it maybe I want to go to that point there, the point number 2. Go ahead and do that. It will merge to point number 2. If I zoom in here, let's go ahead and turn these off, these labels off. I can see that I have a point here, I have a point here. Let's go and merge the two together, and let's merge it into 2, and it will go and begin to merge these together. So again, what it does is it allows you to go and merge the points together, not move them on top of one another. And it's a good way to start realigning things before you actually have any other. Depends upon how much of an offset, how much of a problem you're going to have. If I look over here, I can see there's many of these because of this realignment in here. I can tell it which I want to go and move it to, and I can tell it to move them in that place. I should probably, in this case, I selected more than I needed. I should probably go and turn on my points just to see what these things are. Oh, look at this. So I would suspect that goes with that one. Let's go move that to 1. All right, and clear that up. And these two are just on the same line. We can merge them together. Now, one of the things that it merge point does not do, it does not recalculate your COGO. It basically just redefines the ends of those lines and leaves the COGO values as they stand. But this will allow you to go in here and fix these lines, reaffirm as we used to say with ArcInfo, it would allow you to go in there and reaffirm the topology on this data without you necessarily having to go and redo some of the other tools on here, including here. I go ahead and tell it to go and merge this into 1. We'll go and do that. My recommendation, and again, let me go and finish this while I'm at this, is that my recommendation is go ahead and do this, but, and this is a tricky one. I'm going to use a shift box here to go and add something else. Now, notice when I did that, if I had done this and had all 3 of those, I could actually go in here and say, well, I don't want that one. How do I get rid of it? Well, if I do a shift box, in which case I select one and I hold down the shift key and I select the other one, it only has those 2 in there as part of this. And then I can tell it I want to go to 1 on here, and it will go and take that to 1. This actually looks like on here looking at it, maybe I should have done all of them in here. So let's go and do that all to 1 again. There it is. But you can use your key combinations in here a lot. All right. And so that's actually densify curves, and that's merge points. These are really good tools. I'm so thankful that Esri gave these to us finally in here to go and redefine how these things are put together. Any questions on merge points? Again, one of my favorite tools for doing data cleanup. It really helps quite a bit on here. The next one. Now this one's a little bit different, and this is shrink to seed. And I often get this in which my client will come to me and say, I've got this subdivision, or I've got a parcel, and I've got to go and rebuild it. I know the geometry is bad on it. Maybe it was migrated data and I've got to do survey or something that goes and tells me how to redefine it. How do I go about that? And what do I do? What's the best way? Because going and creating a new record, inputting the traverse, and then trying to go and do an aligned parcels on it often is a frustrating thing. So let's look at what the shrink to seed does. And I think I actually have something here in which we might be able to go and do this. This one is again, this is a challenge because this has got densified curves on here, all sorts of elements in here. This is a little bit more complex. The question is, how can you go and do this and how can you rebuild this? You want to think about what is the problems I'm trying to go and build? What's the real data on here? Chris, thanks. I see that we do have a comment down there. So it only merges or superimposed on each other the points of different layers. It doesn't merge polygons or layers. Correct. So again, just to clarify, and I'll go somewhere over here and do the same sort of thing just to see. So what the merge points really does is the merge points looks at the points and allows you to redefine which of these points that are inside that box that you collected you wish to go and have everything redefined as going to. So in essence, when you go and do this, in this case, I'm going to tell it to preserve number 1. What it does is it deletes number 2, and it redefines everything that's connected to 2. So the line that's connected to 2 here, that gets redefined that it's going to go and connect over to 1. This line that's connected to 2, that will get redefined and gets moved over to here. The polygon that right now is defined that it says its definition of the geometry, not the COGO. The geometry is being defined as going to that point. It now goes to this point. Think of this as being a way to go and do an edit vertices, but on multiple features at the same time on here. It doesn't necessarily merge the polygons or even merge the lines as much as it redefines the geometry that's associated with those features. So in this case, again, I can tell it to merge to 1. They're all separate features too, but instead of saying they are defined by this vertex, it says, no, the vertex that defines them now is this vertex. So it's a recalculation or redefinition of the geometry. Again, because we're parcel mappers for the most part, I want to go and make sure that you understand it does not recalculate the COGO values on any of the lines. However, beware of this. If you've got attribute rules, those attribute rules, when you go and do any change like this, it's a modification to the geometry, and the attribute rules that have the trigger set to modify, they get run. So they get updated every single time on there. I'm curious, now that you raise this question, let's get off of here so we can actually select some things. If I select this here and look, yeah, that's this one here. Ah, look at that. It literally also went and updated the modification date. So I actually did go and modify the geometry associated with it when I did the merge points. Again, attribute rules would have gotten fired off, so it would have possibly updated the calculated area. Also, it would have updated my editor tracking on here, and I made a change to this one here on here. Keeps everything associated with the same record. That's all stays the same, but some of the base level attribution will get modified as you go and modify that. All right. Good question. Thank you. All right, so getting back to this one, this was a challenge. Um, yeah, um, good comment on there. So this was a challenge in that if I go in and it can go and select this again, I know that this is the actual problematic element on here. This was the one. If I go in here and tell it to go and activate the record here and only go and select the features associated with this record, it will then go and show me here are my Kogo lines associated with this. Here's my polygon that's associated with this. And if I tell it over here on here to just show the active record, by the way, for those of you who are contemplating whether or not the parcel fabric is worth it, this is one of the prime examples of how and why it's worth it. I can take any one of these parcels that are built, any one of these subdivision or whatever type of parcel I have, and say, take the record that was used to build this, activate that, and then show me everything that was created as part of this. So it will allow me to isolate what was done, what was created, what was deleted as part of this component on here. So I could actually clear this out. And if I go in here and say, let's take these, and I can see these lines in here, I can see that there's densified curves in here because of the symbology on here. So the question is, this whole subdivision, when it was imported, was not located correctly. Not only was it not located correctly, it had densified curves on it. So it was not cleaned up before it was brought in. Again, the moral of this story is be careful with your data, recognize what you're building and such. So I have options on how to go and do this. Again, I've isolated this. I've made sure that this is sufficient here. I'm looking at the, I'm not quite sure where the seeds are, but yeah. And the question I have is, how do I go? Oh, I told it just select this. I didn't tell it to go and do anything else on here. How can I get it to rebuild this or rebuild it slightly differently? And one of the things I might consider doing is going and telling it to go and let's select this polygon, which is this polygon here. If I tell it shrink it to the seed, and what that does, and I'm sorry about the symbology, there's a seed here, there's a seed there, there's all these seeds in here, all right, for the individual polygons in here. There's a seed here. So those are my seeds. And one of the strategies is that perhaps what I need to do is maybe capture the geometry from another component that I built, or maybe I can reestablish this. I'm not going to do that only because of the sake of time. I know I previously have done this on this data, and it took about 30 minutes just to go and do that. But what I'm going to do is show you a unique element about shrink to seed to make sure that you understand how shrink to seed works. In shrink to seed, what it allows you to do is basically go and do a construct from parent, or what we used to call construct from parent. Now it's called copy lines 2. And that you take the lines and you keep the lines and you leave them. But I'm going to go and do this here. And I'll look and let's turn off my parcels to make it a little bit easier to see. One of the interesting things is that I have my seed here and I have other data that's got subdivision lines on here that are part of this. So let's go back to just show only active. What happens if I were to go and take these lines and delete them? right? And I'm doing this for a purpose, just so we can see this. Again, there's an easier way of doing this. I could have told it to just select those lines that are associated with this record, but sometimes I'm still old school. I want to make sure I get these all. Once I've gone and taken all of these lines, unselect this and delete that. And I've got another couple lines here. All right. So I've got my seeds in here that are used to build this. If I tell it to go and show these back on here, and again, I did not delete my points. I only deleted my lines on there. But if I do this, one of the unique characteristics of the shrink to seed is that when I tell it to rebuild this or reconstruct from seed, it will go out and it doesn't necessarily look at the lines that are part of my record, but rather it looks for lines of the same line type than what I had before. Just to prove this, I'm going to go and just show you here. I'm going to tell it that I want to go and select all the points that are associated with this record. Ah, this must have been built without that. So let's just go and delete these points in here. Okay. And again, once you learn how to use the parcel fabric, you recognize how really amazing this is to be able to go and work on this data like this. All right, that's enough on here. So just to go in and make sure that you understand the overall concept that I'm telling you, I've shrunk it to seed, and I'm going to tell it now, go ahead and reconstruct from my seed. It will go and take those seeds and expand out until it finds similar lines, the same parcel type lines as what it had before. And it will use those to rebuild the geometry of the polygon. Now, again, in this case, it could have been a little bit more on here, but I've told it to just redefine this and make it this new geometry in here that I've got. And if I look, this new geometry is not, in fact, densified curves. It's actually got the new geometry associated with it. So what I wanted to convey with this is that when you are looking at ways to go and rebuild these components, by the way, just sort of to select the features and the active records, let's go and select those lines. It didn't redefine them as part of this active record. Those lines, when it went and rebuilt them, it just said there's lines here. It doesn't necessarily mean they're part of the active record. So it can rebuild in the quality-driven workflows. It can take a record, shrink it to seed, which is the essence of the polygon, and then allow you to rebuild it using lines that are not part of the record, but just lines that are on that same layer. I'm going to do this one more time, and this time I'm going to go and just select my polygons, shrink to seed. Now here's my seeds here to show you. I'm going to go and say, let's create some lines associated with subdivisions. All right. Okay. And when I do reconstruct from seeds, it will now rebuild this polygon and make it only there. So one of the tricks with Reconstruct from seed is just recognizing that it will use the same line type associated with that layer to rebuild your polygons on here. All right. So a couple little tricks in there, some of the things you want to recognize when you're going to build this. So on here, we did reconstruct from seeds, we did shrink to seeds, merge points, densified curves. All right. I'm going to ask, are there any comments, any questions on this?
None in the chat right now.
Okay. I'm going to cut this off. This was not intended, until we get any comments, it's tough to go much further than that, but densified curves, merge points, shrink to seeds, and reconstruct from seeds. These tools are invaluable if you're looking to go and build or correct problem parcels in your data. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed this workshop, and thank you again.